Hello, everyone around the world. Welcome. Bienvenidos, que quiero decirte, to Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I'm your host, Lauren Battistini, color consultant, artist, language learner, and world traveler. Join me each week as I chronicle the most colorful people, places, and experiences I encounter off the beaten path, both near and far. So, let's go. Vámonos, que pame. Welcome back to the Color Studio, everybody, for episode 19 of the podcast. It's always a joy and a privilege to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us today. My guest is Nicole Schumann-Sizaret. She is a German national who now resides in Porto, Portugal, with her husband and two sons. Like many of my guests, she is also multicultural and multilingual, and we'll talk about that a bit. Nicole has two professional roles. One is as managing partner of a creative branding agency, but the second is as owner and founder of Fluent, which is a business. Let me back up, Nicole. It's not a business. It's so much more than that. Okay, question. I'm going to start over again. Did I say something wrong in the interview? Because I saw you look over and go,
it's
what?
Just brilliant, because what is it?
Well, in my notes, I wrote that this is a studio specializing in the Feldenkrais method. And then I wrote that you spent 4 years training in this method by the industry's finest, and you now conduct your workshops in art studios and cultural venues across Europe. So I'm going to start over again, okay? Because I saw you looking over like, you were kind of looking around like, and I thought, did I say something wrong? Okay,
No.
Okay, we'll get started again.
Okay.
Welcome back to the Color Studio, everyone, for episode 19 of the podcast. It is always a joy and an honor to have you here. It is 6 a.m. Houston, Texas time, and it is noon Porto, Portugal time, where I'm speaking with my guest for today. My guest is Nicole Schumann-Sizaret, who is a German national, now residing in Porto, Portugal, of course, with her husband and two sons. Nicole is multilingual and multicultural. We'll discuss that a bit today. She also has two professional roles. One is as managing partner of a branding agency, and the second is as owner of Fluent, which is a Feldenkrais studio, and we'll talk about that in depth today. So Nicole conducts her Feldenkrais workshops in art studios and cultural venues across Europe, and she also did her due diligence and spent 4 years training with the industry's best to become certified in this method. And the motto of her company, the motto of her studio, her passion, is to make movement clear, easy, and fluent. Welcome to the podcast, Nicole.
Thank you. Thank you, Lauren.
I'm really overjoyed to have this time with you, and I know that my audience will be well informed at the conclusion of this, once we get going here. Let's talk about what is Feldenkrais, first of all.
That's the question I would have expected. It's the question everybody asks and everybody struggles to reply. It's a method that works with movement, which doesn't tell you anything for a start. And because you think of sports, you think of exercise. Yes, of course, but more movement is much, much more than that. It touches every single aspect of our lives. When we don't move, we're dead. Simple as that. And learning how much any single move that we make or do or that happens inside us affects how we live, the quality of our life, how we think, how we feel, how we perform, which is very important to people. So knowing about many details is quite, I would say, important. And this is what I get across to people. And not alone is it movement in what we think of a physical sense, but there is also e-movement, e-motion. So, of course, movement also affects us emotionally. So this is a way that I have to work with people on understanding also emotion. And here we come back to my marketing role. We often talk about emotion in business, products. I specialize in working with movement with creative people who may create interaction for others. And we've also heard about emotional design. So in order to create emotion, first you need to know for yourself what actually is that. You need to understand that my emotions are not what you are going to feel, why that is so. And from there, slowly start understanding other people who will be different. Allow some, I call it real empathy to develop, and really start working for other people, understanding what their desires can be, their needs can be. So it's very much unlearning what you know in order to understand others a bit better. Now, this may be complicated, I know. Ask me more direct questions.
Most definitely. So I saw on your website and in our preliminary conversation, we discussed that a large piece of what you do with Feldenkrais, of course, it involves physical movement, which is then designed to affect other areas of your life, unlocking creative potential being one of them.
Exactly.
And so my question then becomes, who are your clients and how do you help them unlock that potential?
The clients are like most are students of design, product design, where the idea of movement is very clear, because when you, I, me, anybody deals with a product, they will move it. Okay, if I have my glass of water here, there is more or less some movement involved. I deal with its weight, I deal with my capacity to hold it. This sounds stupid, and I completely agree. But there is something, but there is a lot behind it. And this is what designers are not always taught, but what in the end will affect how the consumer will deal with their product. And this is where I come in. Number one. Number two, how do you unlock somebody's creative potential?
Yep.
I can give a very, very basic idea. If you feel not very mobile in yourself, a bit stuck, you may have a stiff neck. People are getting older. They think, oh, I can't do this anymore. This is a physical restriction of your own movement as a person. Now, somebody who feels this will not, or will struggle or find it more difficult to open up, to see new, different solutions that they have not yet encountered, maybe because simply they can't turn their head. Again, we're talking about it, we're not doing it. And that's the big problem in our conversation. But that's how it is. When you experience yourself a greater mobility within your own body, physical, the feeling you're having allows you to understand different connections that you may not have felt, sensed. And there it goes on. It is very fine. It is completely possible. It is very experienced, but it cannot be conveyed via language because it is really very central in that sense of the word.
Well, it's fascinating what you do. I spent a long time looking at your website just to get a feel for how the language that you use in and around Feldenkrais. And what kept resonating with me was this unlocking of a creative potential and these are my words, not yours, this connection among the mind, the body, the spirit. Here in the United States, we've got the YMCA workout facilities. I'm a member of this. And they talk about this all the time, that it's all interconnected.
Yeah.
And I think about, too, that there are lots of reasons for people to have this creative block within their physical selves. It could be trauma-based. We store trauma in our body. You would well understand this in your line of work. I have a sort of side question for you. I keep seeing on social media a lot of different exercise-related videos for somatic yoga. Are you familiar with that term? Okay.
Yes and no. I can imagine that it exists because you can link it with anything.
Sure. And so I just
What did you see with that? I would imagine that it would be a more conscious yoga.
That's right. It to me from that, these are ads I'm seeing on social media. It's these people who have probably trauma locked in their bodies or injuries, and they've just have had years and years worth of stress. And so from what I could see from the ads, it seemed to be a gentler form, a slower form of yoga that is supposed to unblock some things. So would you compare that to Feldenkrais for me?
What I would take from that, and thank you for using it, is the word somatic, because that is a word that says what you've just said before, the inseparability of body and mind and spirit. Because again, as my initial example, without our brain, the body is pretty useless, and the brain cannot live without our body. So in biological terms, it is pretty difficult to separate those two. Somatic means exactly that. It comes from the Greek word soma,
the body,
which means body, and it's been used, somatic's been used to describe everything that happens to a person during their life or while they live, where everything is working together.
I'm fascinated by this topic, as an artist myself. I know I've told you that I do art. I'm currently going through a complete creative block right now with my art, to the point, Nicole, where I physically feel anxiety. I'm being vulnerable here. I physically feel an anxiety within my throat and chest, and this deep sense of procrastination and almost fear. And it's not a fear of failure. It's because I have thousands of other things going on with this podcast, with my architectural color consulting business. So I am feeling a physical reaction to the idea of going and creating art right now. So I imagine that if I were there with you, you could help me work through that.
Well, I would hope that, but
yeah, sure. Right, absolutely. So as a practitioner yourself with the Feldenkrais method, you have mentioned to me in our preliminary chat that you've seen this manifest itself in your life in various areas, including language learning and the way that you view the world. Speak to us, please, about your personal experience with it and how it has benefited you.
It benefits all the time. It never stops. And maybe at the moment, the simplest way of saying is that it creates within me an immense flexibility of reacting to what's going on, being able to improvise, being able to judge relatively quickly, which is, to me, a result of this mobility or flexibility that you learn physically with the knowledge that things always change. You experience in your body when I work with the Feldenkrais method, look, I just need to do this and I can change something. I can change something actively. So knowing this changes your life completely, because you're not stuck somewhere in a problem or in some frame that somebody else designed for you. I only need to take an action to change. So this is like an overall thing. And under that, because you've asked me how does that affect me, under that I can see myself being able to adapt better when some change happens. We plan something, doesn't work. Okay. It's as simple as that. Okay. Or now creative, I'd like to do something, yes, but I'm not sure. Is it going to be good? Is it worth a try? If I don't try, I don't know. I'm less hesitant in general. You asked me with regards to language, maybe also less hesitation. You just go, you get less afraid. If you don't do it, you don't know. It's a lot this type of affirmative way of living rather than responding, or rather than, how would you say that in English, when you obey to a certain framework or
conform
yes,
maybe
exactly conforming to something which you believe has to be the way it is. You learn to question more. Does it have to be that way it seems, or can I change something which is better for me?
Those are all good answers, and I know my audience will appreciate this because I think a lot of people have not heard of Feldenkrais. Not really. It's
No, not
popular,
many.
but
Yeah.
but unless you go looking for this, you
Yes.
really would not necessarily find it. And I think that it's a valuable practice. It really is. Let's talk about languages. Let's switch gears for a moment because you speak multiple languages, and I want to find out. Let's ask this way: what languages do you speak? And why, and what's the order in which you learn them? It's a three-part question. What languages do you speak? What order did you learn them? And why did you learn them?
The question, I love it. What language do I speak? Because what does it really mean, speaking a language?
Right.
So you're you're born into a world, and normally you're surrounded by some sort of linguistic phenomena.
Yeah.
This happened to me when I was a baby, and that was in Germany. So I was once absolutely single lingual. So I only knew German, I only heard German, I only spoke German, I only understood German. And then when I was a child still, I moved to Britain. So I got in contact with English, and in an immersive kind of way, or semi-immersive kind of way. And after that came school with French. Pretty bad. What was taught and the way it was taught, that's how I would I would evaluate it now, okay? Because the level is just anyway. Fortunately, much later met my husband, who happens to be French, and so in another immersive kind of way, also by living in France, that formed. So these are the three basic languages I speak pretty well, in the sense that I live in these languages. I can think in them, I act in them, I exist in them without any problem. Then I would say Portuguese, I adapted to it fairly well, but here I still struggle because I've become more lazy.
Well, do you also feel that you have so much on your plate running basically two businesses, being busy with life, you have your own active lifestyle, you and your husband do travel, you've got two now grown sons. Don't you find that the more you have on your plate, the harder it is to learn a new language?
No, it's the other way around.
You don't.
No, the more languages you know, and the more you have on your plate, and the more you want to express actively, because you wish to express, the easier it will be to find that solution. Like, do you know? Yes, in Portuguese you have words that just connote certain things so much better than any other language could.
That's right.
You want to find out, why is that?
Do you know?
Go ahead.
I'm so happy to hear you say this, Nicole, because I'm learning Greek as my third language. I'm scared about forgetting Spanish, which is my second language. I was just at a presentation 2 nights ago where this gentleman was speaking. It was a theological discussion. He was born in Uruguay, raised in Buenos Aires, Argentina. And I listened to the entire speech, and I kept getting, I understood about 85% of it, but I kept getting lost on some words. And I left feeling panicked and overwhelmed, thinking, did I forget my Spanish? Did I forget my Spanish? No, I did not forget my Spanish. So you're saying the busier you are, the more you have on your plate, actually the easier it is to continue learning languages or anything.
I would say so, because if you enjoy what you're doing, and you're doing it out of curiosity and you want to know, you just go. It's not even learning.
Yes, you were correct, because I often, in one of my podcasts, this was one of my monologue episodes, I talked about some of my non-traditional language learning tips. And one of them was, first of all, identifying your why. You've got to understand why you're learning a language, right? And to figure out what's motivating you to learn it is what I'm really saying. So Spanish, for example, I have a Spaniard heritage. And so I wanted to learn Spanish. Plus, when I started studying it, I was in Costa Rica and I had a little boyfriend there. And that makes it easier to want to learn a language. Truly it does. So I'm pleased to hear you say that you have, the more you have on your plate actually does not negate the possibility of learning new things. You can still make room if it's something you're passionate about and you're curious about.
Exactly.
I love that. Speaking of language tips, do you have any tips for learning languages? Any shortcuts? Well, there are no shortcuts really to become fluent, but You just have to go through the painful, arduous process. Do you have any language learning tips for people, adults, my audience, who they are trying to learn a second or third language?
I was wondering, actually, while you're speaking, I suppose the biggest hurdle may be the second language. If you really never ever learned another language than one, I think that may be a bit difficult, and you need to have a really good reason to do that.
Mm-hmm.
But you will, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it. And to follow that reason. And I suppose many people will notice the more then they are open to different sounds, to the possibility that people are actually very similar in this world, and with a few differences, but in general we're all the same. Just that the way we show it, paint it, express it in words, in body, language, because that's also a language. The more you accept that and you study that and you get curious about that, the easier it will become. So when you learn a language, it is always obviously helpful to be in a place where not just you, but many different other people use that same vehicle of expression.
Yep.
Because then you'll learn it so much more easily.
I agree with you. Immersion is the best way to really become conversational in a language. And then from there, you can do independent study. You can listen to podcasts. You can do word vocabulary, word cards.
Read as well.
Reading. You can do Duolingo. I tell you what I've done with Greek is I listen to, it's funny. I listen to Greek rap music, which is going to sound so funny. But if you think about it, all rap, urban type music, they use basic everyday vernacular. So I'm able to listen to phrases.
Brilliant. Brilliant.
And then the irony is alongside that, I'll listen to in Greek news podcasts.
This is brilliant.
Sermons.
Yeah.
So I was just curious, since you've learned so many languages, I just wanted to know your take on it. I'm enjoying hearing your perspective here. So you and your husband and kids live in Porto, Portugal, as I said in the beginning. I went there last year. I was in Porto for about 6 or 7 days, and then Lisbon for 2 days. I fell in love with Porto. It's a very walkable place. People are very warm, kind, friendly. I would describe it as a cultured place. People dress very well. People have wonderful etiquette. The food is amazing. But you've been living there for a while. So I want to ask you to give our audience some insights on what life is like in Porto. First of all, what's life like there?
Whose life?
Your life. What's your life like there?
Yeah, what's my life? Certainly very many different. I suppose what's most striking me at the moment is what an immigration place Portugal, and also especially Porto, has become, which has changed what I've seen of Porto. I've been here for 14 years, incredibly. When I came, if you didn't speak Portuguese, you had a serious problem. Now I go anywhere and people address me in English, which I find very embarrassing. So this maybe is the biggest thing. Porto has become a very international place.
I saw that when I was there.
It is also a very open place in one way. It may seem very closed. The streets are very small and narrow. The houses are partly very small. Sometimes people are a bit smaller than elsewhere. The language is not easy to understand, and yet, almost contradictory, they have an incredible openness for new things, which is not given. Not many other societies cultivate this approach. So that is definitely something I would say for Portugal. Although they have a very strong tradition and they love it, they're incredibly open to things from the outside.
I think that's something to emulate.
It gives them also, it gives them also a big advantage in, I would say, in potential of, being able to accumulate own heritage with new knowledge and experience.
Okay. I love those insights as well. Well, when I was there, I found it to be a place with, again, amazing food. Loved the climate. I was there in around springtime. Everything was
Yeah.
walkable.
You're listening to Coloring My Way Across the Globe with Lauren Battistini. For more information, check out lfbcolor.com.
Now, I did go to the bookstore, La Livreria.
Livreria Lello.
Livreria Lello. Well, guess what? So did a tour bus of about 50, I don't know, 100 people from I can't remember where with all of their cameras. And Nicole, I just wanted to get some beautiful shots of the architecture on the inside, and I just couldn't do it because there were so many people in there. So what I did while I was there is I looked at the most touristy looking spots where I saw the largest number of people, and I would walk a couple blocks away to go find restaurants.
Perfect.
Found some great places. So you know the Cleric Tower? I know you know that. Okay.
Yes.
If you're looking straight at the Cleric Tower, which if you go to the top, you have a complete panoramic view for all my guests. It's a gorgeous thing. You've got to do it. If you're looking at the front of it, to the right of it are some side streets. And I found just this beautiful little bitty family-owned, I'm going to call it a tavern, sort of like a tavern, that could seat, it literally could seat maybe 7 people tops. Had a great time. It was 10 o'clock in the morning. There was an older gentleman there. I speak Spanish, so I was trying to learn Portuguese. So we were doing some kind of portuñol mixture, Spanish and Portuguese. This guy wanted to give me wine. I was drinking wine with him at 10 o'clock in the morning. It was great. It was a great thing. So I love off the beaten path experiences, which leads me to my question. If any of our audience wanted to visit Porto for, say, 3 days, could you recommend some places that might not be as touristy, just some places that give them a more authentic flavor of Porto? Any suggestions?
I would definitely recommend to do exactly the same thing than you, which is just wander around in, say, 2-3 districts. You can take the center, and then when you go, of course, off that, there's an area called Bonfim, which is further to the east, where you have the public library, you have the High Scola de Belas Artes, which is the
fine arts?
Fine arts, exactly, building. And then there, it's a bit of a new bohemian area. There's nothing really to see as such, but you'll have renovated houses, you'll have some nice cafes, you'll have some art galleries, you'll have some still very traditional shops, and exactly these tascas you were talking about, the taverns. You'll have still the old shoemaker that makes shoes from scratch as well as repairs them. The odd ruin that's standing about, because there still are a lot of ruins here. That's yet another zone you can just wander about. And then what I would definitely do is go to the sea, although there you'll find all the tourists, but even despite that, it's also worth it. It's an area that's called Foz in Portuguese, F-O-Z. And it's exactly where the river that Porto is on joins the sea. And that in itself is, how can I say, it's just a nice place to imagine that when you stand here, the next best will be the US or Brazil or what have you. To stand at the border of Europe.
Okay, those are good tips. Now, also when I was there, speaking of beach towns, I took a taxi, or I can't remember what we took to get there. I went to, is it Matosinhos?
Matosinhos, yeah.
Matosinhos, which is a very beach town. You also conduct some of your workshops there, yes?
I live there.
Oh, you live there? Okay.
I live there.
I really enjoy that community. It was a little bit windy the day that I went, but you can just walk for miles along that beach line and it's definitely a coastal town. Get the freshest seafood possible. It's
very known. It's very known for the fish restaurants. So, I mean, I would tell you, yes, definitely go there if you want to eat fish. You'll find, especially one street where you have the grills, the barbecues just on the street. It is admittedly very touristy, but you do get the freshly grilled fish, which has come in the morning from the harbor. So if you eat fish, I do it there.
What do you think about traveling in what we call the shoulder season? That's how I travel. When I know that the tourist season has kind of ended, for example, I was in Greece for 5 weeks in late September, October last year. I missed all that touristy crowd. And when I was in Portugal, it was maybe February-ish. Was it February? And the weather was mild, and I missed all of that crowd. Do you try to travel that way? So they call it shoulder season or off-season traveling.
Yeah, off season. I suppose I do. I don't really know, but I would suppose yes, I think so. In general, I avoid crowds, so I think that's what I would probably do. And the beauty is if your kids are grown up and you're not dependent on any dates as such. Yeah, sure.
Well, let me tell you, I'm kind of an opportunist. Yes, I like to travel on shoulder season during shoulder season, but if I procure a really good flight somewhere, a really good deal, I'll make a trip somewhere.
Sure.
Because my kids are grown, and I can do that now, Nicole.
Exactly.
Your
Here we
kids
go.
are grown too.
When you can, you do it.
Yes, and you've yourself traveled. You've come back from a trip to Great Britain, correct?
Yes, yeah. I went to visit a friend. It was great.
Wonderful, wonderful. So, talking about travel experiences, you've done a bit of travel, I know, throughout the world. Or you've certainly lived in a few places. And what is one travel experience that you had that was unexpectedly memorable?
Well,
and why?
I suppose it's not one. I suppose it's many. The most recent, really different this time was Japan. And that was because despite everything you can imagine before, that it's far away, it's a different culture, they have a different language, being immersed in just how difference can be, that I found really, how would I say, sweet. In Portuguese, they would say engraçado, and I can't now just in this moment find another word for it. And cute, maybe, because there are really many, many different aspects to differences between people, language, the way they do things, the way I'm used to doing things. Does this shock me? Is it different? Why do I find it different? This kept us busy literally all of the 2-3 weeks we were there.
Yes. Well, my son and I were in Japan, ironically, last year for 2 weeks. Nicole, we found the same thing. And you just said it a moment ago, how different really is in Japan.
Yeah.
We could not have prepared ourselves for it. And we were pleasantly surprised by it. And I, to be frank, wasn't quite sure how to, from an etiquette standpoint and a tourist standpoint, navigate through it. Look, I'm a loud person. I talk with my hands. My son and I, we're loud. We had to tone it down completely when we were in Japan. We tried to come to a whisper because their culture is just so much more reserved.
Yeah, you adapt.
And
yeah,
quiet. We did our best to adapt. I can't say that we did it perfectly because we're still who we are. But, that culture, there are layers and layers to the Japanese culture. And 2 weeks there barely scratches the surface.
Yes, of course.
We learned as much as we could, and we were on the go a lot. But so you had a similar experience there.
Yes, exactly.
Where in particular did you travel while you were in Japan?
That was recall. A very touristy tour. We did the big cities, so to say, Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto.
Nice. Okay, so and we did those too. If you ever return there, or when you return, there is a town of bathhouses called Kinosaki Onsen, and onsen means bathhouses. And it is this small little quaint community. We stayed there for about 4 or 5 days, and it was amazing. You felt like you were stepping back in time.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that the word amazing is so just overused. My goodness, it is. But I'm not finding another descriptor. It just was incredible. It was literally otherworldly. And we cherish that experience. So
We were there one night, actually. One night before you
Ah,
want to
Kinosaki, okay.
Yes, and I know what you mean.
It was lovely. It was lovely. So Japan, do you have another travel experience that maybe you thought was going to be basic and touristy, but turned out to be something much more?
Touristy, to be honest, I hardly ever do.
Me, nor do I.
Probably the latest one when I went to Britain, and you need to know. Did I say that? Anyway, I did my university education in Britain, so there was a moment when I was very British in a way, and I would have stayed there. I loved it. It was great. I learned immense things in that place, from the people. And then I hadn't been there for a really, really long while. So by now that is 30 years, believe it or not, or 29, don't know, maybe 28 if I'm lucky. And having come back after that long time, it was actually a big culture shock. Now, this is probably a very European story. You may have heard of Brexit and all that, but
yes.
It was very deep. Let's say it that way, very deep. Incredibly positive, with a few side impressions to it. But I'm still digesting, and I'm still going to make sense of all this, and hopefully going to use it in a really good way.
Yes. One of the things I have to commend you about is I find you to be a very inquisitive, culturally curious, just very open individual. You seem to be very open to life's experiences, and I would imagine that you integrate them into your work with Feldenkrais. I'm imagining that. And that to some degree Feldenkrais has enabled you to be this way.
Yes,
would you agree?
I would say you learn a lot to become as non-judgmental as you possibly can, which allows you this openness. You also learn to criticize or question yourself with a lot more ease. You say, oh, is this really so important? Am I really so right? Do I really know this? And this sort of play with yourself and others makes you a lot more independent, even stronger in a way. Now you go back and make the sense to Feldenkrais, but as soon as you have this mobility and you see me do it, because it just automatically comes. You feel you can question more. You're not so scared, basically. You're not scared by any others because they have their own way of being. Yeah.
Well, I'll tell you this, that one of the reasons I started this podcast, Coloring My Way Across the Globe, is very specifically to inspire, educate, and encourage people to have their own colorful experiences near or far. And for some people, that might look like going to just, not even traveling, going down the street to an ethnic restaurant they've not tried before, meeting the family who owns the restaurant, finding out why they use the ingredients that they do, finding out a little bit about their culture. How eye-opening is that? And so my podcast is really, all of my guests so far, and I'm grateful for this, have been very open to the world around them and happy to share some of their stories. So my guests really make this podcast what it is. And so let's start to shift gears a little bit to the field of color. I'll start with this. I love your logo design of Fluent, and I love your color choice. And the logo, your tagline or your mission is to make movement clear, easy, and fluent, hence the name Fluent. But your logo also does a great job of visually representing that. How did you go about developing your logo?
By thinking a lot about what it is I want to convey, exactly what you've said, because I was going to say we know, but not we doesn't mean everybody. Logos are not just a little graphic scribble. They have a lot of thinking behind them when they're good. And so anything which you express in a visual way, you need to know before what is it you want to express, and the creative person is going to know how that is then best done. So this is how I went about it. I thought a lot about what is it I want to convey, and I worked with a professional creative person, who I am not, to transform that into something that hopefully many people can understand.
I could understand it. And look, I'm a color professional. This is my specialty, but I also really enjoy branding as it pertains to color.
Yeah.
So I've got to commend
Yes,
you.
yes.
I was very impressed because to me, your logo, as well as the color choices, it conveys this sense of flow, but yet the lines are so very clean that to me, it legitimizes, solidifies your credentials, and that this is something to be taken seriously, that it's not just some flowy, cutesy thing. There is
and
science.
Here you're making a nice difference between fluent and flowy, which is supposedly less clear, whereas the lines, you said they were serious and clear. Very interesting.
Right. I really appreciated your logo design and the color choices. So let's keep on this conversation of color. We're drawing to a close in a few minutes here, Nicole, but I see you've got in your studio here a purple wall, which I love. And for those listeners, I'm going to be releasing video here, but for my listeners, I can describe this as a very bold, deep grapey kind of purple. And then Nicole's wearing this beautiful green, kind of an avocado tone cable knit sweater with a cute little top underneath it with some pattern. I love it. So talk to me about how you feel about color and how you use it in your life.
Oh, wow. I think, no, seriously, I think without color, it would be pretty dull. I realized at some point I'm a very visual person, as opposed to some who are more audio, maybe. And colors, they talk to me emotionally, which everybody needs to understand for themselves what it means. And I notice what a color can do to me and supposedly do to others. And I like experimenting an awful lot. I also like getting it wrong and understanding why that does not speak to me, why it gives that emotion. Colors are incredibly emotional, of course. They can convey that. This is why they're being used in marketing, in branding, in any visual communication. And you've said it so nicely. You said if people want to color their lives, why don't they go and eat a different food? Colors go beyond a visual impression. Many people also see different things in colors instead of hearing them. Sometimes they hear colors or they taste colors. To me, something can taste brown. So I think colors, it's very important. And it's an incredibly interesting field to work with and to understand its implications, its power. Colors are just powerful.
That is a very well thought out answer. I like your insights. I knew you'd have some things to say about this, especially with your branding, with the branding side of what you do. I do have a final question about color, but before that, a penultimate question is for people who are interested in working with you at Fluent, how would they go about doing that? And how do you conduct group workshops? Do you work with individuals? Do you work remotely with people? Tell me about your workflow, please, so people know how to get in touch with you and how they could work with you.
I work with people on one-to-one basis, so that is really physical. They have to be here and there and with me.
Yeah.
I also I conduct classes that can be physical and it can be remote. And there is also a way to work on a very one-to-one basis, which would then be a mixture of remote, but in a very much more personalized way, where I can watch somebody online and can instruct them, invite them very personally to do rather this or that, to have this or that experience. So that are ways to work, be it physically in presence or be it online. How to get in touch with me, it's very simple. By mail, mail is probably the nicest and safest and still the way that I like it most, if I had the choice.
And in the comment section, and in the description section for this podcast episode, I will make sure that I have your website along with your email address for people.
Yeah, it will be on there.
So as we draw to a close, Nicole, I want to ask you, what does it look like to live a colorful life to you?
To do as many things as you possibly can. and not find an excuse to not do anything. To be happy, to do stuff that you enjoy, and when it's not, then you find some more joy. You can always do something. I actually love Nike for their just great, whoever made it up, just do it.
Just do it.
And yeah, just do it. It's really that. It's
That's
really
a great.
that. I'm sorry that I have to say, I don't really like Nike particularly much because my feet are not so good in it. But for that one, they really managed well.
I agree with you. It is that simple. And so to what I'm hearing you say is that a colorful life is one in which you can be open and you can get out there and experience things that are enjoyable to you.
And you make it enjoyable, hence the colors, and colorful. You get as many different impressions as you possibly can. That's rich.
And I think in your case too, from what I've seen you describe, a colorful life. Throughout this interview, you've mentioned a lot about experimentation. You're not afraid to experiment. And I would imagine that that's one layer of living a colorful life, is experimenting and painting the wall a color that doesn't turn out right. And as you said, why don't you like it? Asking yourself, why don't I like this? What can I learn from it? What new color could apply? So, well, this has been a very enlightening, informative, fun conversation, Nicole, and I really want to thank you for being today's guest. I really appreciate you.
Thank you for having me. It was really nice. Thank you.
And I hope that when I return to Portugal, that I can go visit you and we can have a cup of coffee.
You'll come.
I would love to, and hopefully I can participate in one of your workshops at some point in time, because boy, I could use one to remove this little creative block I have going with my art, I tell you.
Let's do that.
Let's do this. We'll plan for it someday. So to my audience, thank you so much for joining today. And I want to share a couple of quick stats with you before we conclude. The podcast has now been listened to in 19 countries, 502, I think, cities, and on every continent except Africa. I'm waiting to have some audience members from Africa tune in. Hopefully you will do so soon. So again, I thank you all for being here. Nicole, thank you once again. And until next time, everybody, have a colorful week. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this week's episode of Coloring My Way Across the Globe. I hope that you've enjoyed the conversation, and we would love to stay connected with you throughout the week. The best way to connect is by subscribing to our newsletter at www.lfbcolor.com. That's www.L as in Lauren, F as in Frank, B as in boy, color, COLOR.com. Also, you may find us on Instagram using the same handle, LFB Color, for the latest stories, podcast guest profiles, travel photography, language learning diaries, and my own colorful art. Hope to see you there, friends. Thank you again.